My name is Byron McLean, and thank you for coming to the Institute of Politics. Here tonight, we have Senator Alan Simpson, and he will introduce us to our 1999 Spring Fellows. Thank you again.
I was just pressing into my lips a piece of pizza. It's very difficult to get used to pizza 3 times a day. And I don't know that I'll ever make it, but you're all very encouraging. Well, it is a nice evening for you and for the fellows. This is a especially great group in my mind. It's the 3rd fellows class that I have come to know. They have a special chemistry already. I see a special energy that I've not seen before. There's always tremendous individual people here who, after several weeks, form up a chemistry. These people, I don't know what they're up to, but they're with it, and so they are a tremendous resource for you, and use them. And they're here for you. They are people friendly. They are accessible. One of the best parts of the Institute of Politics programs, of course, is the fellows. And so tonight, for 4 or 5 minutes each, and I'll be carefully monitoring their activities, we have the fellows for you. And we'll go alphabetically here, and each of them will tell you just a little bit about whatever. And perhaps how they came to have an interest, what they've done. But let me introduce, starting to my right, Barbara Barrett, Executive Vice President of the International Women's Forum since 1997. In 1996, she was the Arizona campaign chair for Steve Forbes for president. She was the Republican candidate for governor of Arizona in 1994, the first woman to run for that office in the state. And while she was dabbling in all these things, she flew the F-18 Hornet off an aircraft carrier, the Nimitz. And this is quite a remarkable woman. Barbara, please.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you. Well, flying an F-18 Hornet off of and onto an aircraft carrier is nothing compared to following Senator Simpson in a small conversation in a group like this. It's a real treat to be here. My background is a bit unusual for my colleagues, or a little out of disjoint from what some of my colleagues might be, in that my background is both in business and in government, in that my early career was in business, primarily in business. My father died when I was young, and I was left to provide an income for 6 children and my mother when I was 13. And I did that by taking people horseback riding and training horses and teaching people to ride. I went to college and paid my way through college, and did that in part by working in an internship at the state legislature. And that created a monster. Since then, I've had a great interest in both the business side that was my bread and butter and continues to be, but also in making our state, our community, our country, and our world a better place. And much of that can get done by devoting some time and talent and energy to working in appointive and elective offices in the government. I've since had the privilege of working at the local level, the city level, the county level, the state level, the national level, and international level on a variety of political and often aviation and trade topics. And that's been about the best fun you could ever hope for. The F-18 flight was a result of serving as a civilian advisor to the then Secretary of Defense, Dick Cheney, a Wyoming colleague of the senators, and a man in whom I place a great deal of respect. He and Colin Powell were in a leadership role when America's leadership was called for, and I had the privilege of working in a civilian role And one of the issues that was up at that time was whether or not women should be allowed to fly fighters and bombers. And I was of the impression that talent should dictate that rather than gender. So I found myself being asked to prove that women could fly things that shoot back, not just the defenseless aircraft that women were previously allowed to fly. And that's how I found myself at one point going out to Lemoore Naval Air Station after a lot of testing and training, and taking off an F-18 and flying out into the deep Pacific and landing 4 full trap landings for the aviators among you. 4 full trap landings, 1 touch and go, and 1 wave off foul deck. The guy ahead of us hadn't gotten out of the way in time, so there wasn't a clear deck to land on. The political world is great fun, and you never know where it's going to lead. And I suspect we're going to hear a lot of other careers that have a very specific and set sequence. And mine is much more a hodgepodge and much more a matter of amazing, curious things that came up. And I consider the privilege of being here at Harvard one of those great, amazing privileges that just came up. And I'm pleased to respond to any questions that there might be as the occasion arrives. And I'd like to just say that I would encourage you to, whatever business or political careers you choose, be sure to include just a little bit of the other side of the fence as well. Those leadership talents that you develop in your business or in your political careers will go to good use on the other side of the fence, and both sides need to understand well how they work with the other. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We approve that you wear a safe tie.
Thank you so much. And we have 2 David Beasleys who have been former, 2 Davids, not 2 David Beasleys, 2 David Pryor and David Beasley, who have both been governors of their state. The next person I introduce was the governor of South Carolina from 1995 to 98, and had the great honor and responsibility to chair the Republican Governors Association from 1997 to 1998, and I know that our governor in Wyoming, Jim Geringer, thought very highly of you. This man, as a 20-year-old, ran for the state legislature, for state representative in his state, and he won. He turned 21 while he was in office. In my day, you couldn't vote till you were 21, but I'm sure this was during the 18-year-old voting activity. Yes, or you would have been in there as a fraud. and he served in the South Carolina House from 1979 to 1992. Extraordinary public servant who, with a lot of courage, always laid himself on the line. David Beasley.
Al, thank you. You never know where life's going to take you. It was 1977. I'd gone home over the Christmas holidays. I was a junior in college. I was not majoring in government or political science. I was in microbiology. Now, you figure. I went home over the Christmas holidays, and I said something to my mom. I said, Mom, I'm thinking about running for the House of Representatives. Oh, that was the wrong thing to say. My mom jumped all over me. Son is dirty, is corrupt, and it'll get you too. My father had been in politics. My grandfather had been in politics. My great-grandfather had been in politics. My great-great-grandfather, my great-great-great-grandfather. I don't know if she was speaking from experience or whether she knew that maybe it was in my bloodline that I had to run for politics, but she was concerned. And here was my own mom saying to her beloved youngest baby boy, don't get involved. And that thing really hit me, because I knew if the average person said, don't get involved, if the only people that get involved are those people with bad ethics, or bad moral judgment, then we will get what we deserve. And so I made that conscious decision at the age of 20 that I was going to run for the House of Representatives. I had never voted before in my life. I wasn't even registered to vote. I had to go register. I started campaigning. And as you can imagine, as many of you have already asked me, didn't people ask you, aren't you too young? I had that asked over and over and over. Aren't you too young? What do you know about solving these problems? And I was as honest as I could be. saying that I'm young. I don't know anyone that has a solution to all of the problems. In fact, I don't know anyone that even knows what all the problems are. But I do know that if we work together, we can make a difference. And by the way, we young people didn't cause all these problems. How about let us be a part of the solution? And that was in 1978 when I ran, and I only won by 3 votes. So every vote does count. And when my first day in the legislature, I walked to the floor of the House, and you can imagine how excited I was. I was really with the big guys and gals in politics. There I was, 21 years of age, walking on that floor of the House, and what of this esteemed body, and the former Speaker of the House, Speaker Emeritus, named Saul Blott. He's legendary in Southern politics. And he looked at me and he said, "Son, would you go get me a cup of coffee?" He thought I was a page. I went and got him a cup of coffee, and I became governor later on. He wanted to play the game. No.
What happened to him?
Politics is an interesting business, and it's very important to America's future. And as I look back now, and I served basically 20 years in the political arena, and some of my best friends were my biggest enemies on the floor of the House or maybe on the gubernatorial field. But I respected and admired people with different opinions who made the tough fight, took on the tough issues. I took on some tough issues when it wasn't politically expedient. And I would ask all of you to be involved because America needs you. It's critical. But do it the proper way. I think all of the fellows here would stand up and say how much we denounce this petty bickering that we see taking place nowadays. I mean, I don't like you just because you're a Democrat, or I don't like you just because you're a Republican. That's not American. We all want to stand up for what we believe in and work within the democratic process, young and old, black and white, male and female, and make a difference. And you can make a difference. And I am walking proof that a little old country boy, and everyone said he can't run, he can't win, he can't make a difference. You can. And everyone sitting up here tonight, they are living proof that you can make a difference, and you will if you just get involved.
David, thank you very much. The next fellow, Skip Humphrey from Minnesota, another man of courage, Democratic farmer labor candidate for governor in 1998, served as Minnesota Attorney General from 1983 to 1998. He was the first Attorney General to bring an antitrust and consumer fraud lawsuit against the tobacco company. And he did that with great skill and great success. Interestingly enough, his father Hubert and my father Millward served together in the United States Senate. His father, as Vice President of the United States, spoke before me as a freshman legislator in Cheyenne, and I shall never forget that. He was such a genial, gentle man, Hubert Humphrey, and these traits are in his son. And we're very pleased to have him here. Skip Humphrey.
Thank you. Thank you, Alan. Every so often I have somebody come up and say, well, now, how did you get in politics? I think I was born into it. Certainly, if you're in the Humphrey family, even if you decide that you're not going to become a part of the public side of politics, you're in it. My brothers and my sister, we every single weekend, every time we were with my parents, both mother and father, it was a matter of politics. In fact, the first time I can remember, way back in Minneapolis, I remember when I was about 3.5 years old or so, coming down the stairs and seeing a fellow with a sawed-off shotgun sitting in the living room. And I ran upstairs, and I can distinctly remember telling my parents in their bedroom, there's a man down there with a gun. And my father said, it's okay, son. It was a police officer that had been sent over to protect the then mayor of Minneapolis, who was trying to clean up the cities. And so in a sense, the history that I start with is basically being in that process. But there are a number of people and a number of events that frankly, allowed me to kind of, I guess, go into the business of politics and of governance and of making a decision, as the governor here has said so ably, to decide that you can make a difference. And I've got to tell you that it is such an honor to be here in the John F. Kennedy School. I remember as a freshman having gone to a good Republican prep school and basically having all my very dear friends tell me that Mr. Nixon had destroyed Mr. Kennedy in the debates, to see him win, and then as a freshman to hear John F. Kennedy give on a rather cold and drizzly day that inaugural address, and it still rings in my ears to this very moment when he said, you know, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. And at that point in time, it was right at that point that I was basically saying, what can I do? How do I get involved? How do I get engaged? I loved history. I certainly had been around it in a sense with my father in the Senate, and I had seen some of the battles in my first campaigns somewhat independently. We're out in Wisconsin when an optimistic and maybe foolhardy gentleman by the name of Humphrey took on a Kennedy and got whipped pretty good. There was another person that made a big difference in 1974 after I had just been elected to the state senate and had that wonderful same feeling about being at a place where decisions could be made and action could take place and we could affect people's lives. I had a chance to travel to Russia with some friends, and some were pretty far to the left of even a DFLer from Minnesota, and others were pretty far to the right of, I would say, Mr. Reagan and others. And I was thinking to myself, how am I going to spend 18 days with all these folks? And I began to realize very quickly, 18 days traveling in the Soviet Union, how close we really are in our political arena. Later on in the next year, I had a chance to, and during that trip, by the way, I had a chance to visit with some Russian refuseniks and to see what kind of oppression there really can be in a governmental system, and to begin to realize how free we truly are here and how we need to preserve that. The next year, I had a chance to visit Israel for the first time, and I met a heroine of mine, Golda Meir. And I met her not as a prime minister, but we were waiting in her little apartment, 2-bedroom apartment. And where was she? She was down the street picking up groceries to come back and to visit. And the first time that I had a chance to see this marvelous, wonderful woman who really did everything in her life. Those are very special times. And then there was a professor, a law professor, that took us aside in the third year of law school and said, I would put the books down. We're not talking about cases. We're going to talk about what it means to be an officer of the law and to uphold the law and to go beyond just what your client's concerns are and to ask how your client's interests fit within the framework of the rule of law and what responsibilities you have as an officer of the court and as a participant in the legal profession. It made an indelible impression upon me that I had the opportunity, if I took it, to make a difference. Since then, I've had a marvelous time in working both from the legal perspective as well as the perspective of politics and being engaged in the political arena. And I just want to encourage every one of you, if there's one place on this earth that anyone with any name, with any background, can make a difference. If you get into that politics, you can make a difference in a huge way, not only for yourself, but for all of your colleagues and for the people where you live and in this country, and frankly in this world.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Skip. This next gentleman rolled out of his crib into the political arena. David Pryor. David Pryor and I came to the Senate together, and we exited the Senate together under our own power. We both looked at each other and said, get out before they throw you out. Yeah. Now, this is a unique man. He was in the state legislature in Arkansas at 25, 26. He then was elected governor of Arkansas, but first he was a member of Congress, the U.S. Congress, went from the state legislature to the U.S. Congress from 67 to 73, and then was elected governor of Arkansas from 74 to 78, ran for the U.S. Senate in the election of 78, and served 3 terms as the United States Senator from Arkansas, and retired in January of 97. As I say, we came to the Senate together. This is a senator of great heart and loyalty, and he chaired the Ethics Committee and did it in the most fairest of fashion that I observed in my time. And he and Barbara are among our most special friends, and it's a treat to have him here. And I urged him, I said, Dave, come. Well, I can't do it. Anyway, David.
Thank you, Alan. Thanks, Alan. Thank you, Alan. And I don't know how to express my appreciation and gratitude enough to all of those who made it possible for Barbara and myself to come and spend these few weeks in Cambridge. I'd never been here before. And to be received here and be taken in, not only by those who help us on a daily basis right here in the Institute of Politics and the Kennedy School of Government, but basically by the people of this community. It's been a warm and wonderful community. I thought only Southerners were friendly, and now, well, I've never seen friendliness like this, and I just want to say how we are very, very grateful for that. We're a little bit presumptuous tonight, I think, the 7 of us, in coming to you, the cream of the crop of America's young people, and asking you to become a part of one of the most unpopular professions and businesses in America, and that's politics, and that's government. And it is unpopular to be associated with and especially directly involved in the art of self-government. It's sad, but it's true. I think a couple of things have happened in the last 20 or 30 years maybe, Alan, and my colleagues. I think that generally speaking, as a general rule, Americans have never really cared about their politicians. They've always been the butt of jokes and the butt of editorial cartoons. There's some losies out there. I tell you, there's some tough ones out there 100 years ago if you want to go see them. And it was pretty mean and vicious from the public to the politician. But what I do think has changed, and David Beasley may have touched on this just to a little bit and skip, is I think that politician to politician, it's gotten a little rougher. There's not quite that trust. There's not that same feeling of comity or camaraderie. There's a great story that my friend Dale Bumpers loves to tell, and I'll really try to make it short. Everett Dirksen and Lyndon Johnson were the Democrat and Republican leaders, respectfully, of the Senate. LBJ in his limousine had a telephone. Everett Dirksen wanted more than anything else to have in his limousine a telephone. Lyndon Johnson says, Eb, if you'll just get me enough votes to pass this civil rights bill, I'll see to it that we get you a phone. So sure enough, the civil rights bill passed. I'm really cutting out a lot of this. And Everett Dirksen goes out late in the afternoon sun. Shadows of the Capitol are going down. The civil rights bill is passed. Dirksen is delivered on his part, Johnson on his part. And Lyndon Johnson gets in his car and speeds away. Dirksen gets in his car, and the driver of Dirksen's car says, Senator Dirksen, you might notice you've got a telephone. Oh, my goodness, I've got a phone. He says, dial so-and-so. That's Senator Johnson's car. So he dials so-and-so. Lyndon Johnson picked up in his car, by then halfway across town, Says, this is Lyndon Johnson, and this is Everett Dirksen, Lyndon. I just want to thank you for this phone. And Lyndon says, wait a minute, Ev, hold on a minute, my other phone is ringing. It's just a great somehow or another, not that relationship among politicians, between politicians. And this is where we come to you as fellows and come to share some parts of our lives, good and bad, a lot of bad, some good, to share some of our lives with the hope that through us we might inspire just one of you to someday be involved with the greatest political system that man has ever devised. We hope we're successful in doing that. Thank you.
David, thank you. Jonathan Schwartz, Associate Deputy Attorney General for the U.S. Department of Justice. Janet knows he's here. He has not been released from his duties. He is here sharing time with us, and we're very pleased to have him. He has coordinated any number of issues between the Justice Department and the Office of Independent Counsel Kenneth W. Starr. Some interesting things you could draw on in his study group. From 1991 to 95, he was a federal prosecutor in the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Southern District of New York. And he, I'm sure, can share some marvelous stories about a marvelous man. He was law clerk for Supreme Court Justice Thurgood Marshall. A very delightful gentleman and eligible. Jonathan? Yeah. That threw you off, didn't it?
Thanks for those kind words, Al. Not so sure I like that anymore. But it is a privilege to be here at the Institute of Politics at the Kennedy School. It's also a great privilege of mine to be here on the same panel with such a distinguished group of individuals. And I must say it's a bit intimidating to follow David Pryor on this group. He's been very courteous to me in the 2 weeks that we've been here together, and I must say I thank him for not questioning why he's on the same panel as somebody like me who's been at a law school fewer years than he served in the United States Senate. I also stand in somewhat different shoes along with Bill Taylor in that I've never sought elected office, and here I am, though, at the Institute of Politics. And I think the thing that I hope to share with students and others during my studies seminar is the fact that even if you don't seek political office, and I have learned as a law clerk to Justice Marshall and as a federal prosecutor and also serving in Janet Reno's Justice Department, that you really can be part of the political life of this country even if you don't seek political office. Indeed, I think it's fair to say that over the last 3 years or so that I've served in the main Justice Department as opposed to as a federal prosecutor, the Justice Department really has been at the center, needless to say, of some of the nation's most highly charged political battles. So for those of you who are not thinking you want to run, I hope I can share with you my experiences about how you can nonetheless be part of the public life. But not as someone who's run. I do have a few notes that I'm going to rely on, not as a career politician. And I want to say that there wasn't any one incident that spurred my interest in public service. There wasn't a gentleman sitting in my living room growing up as a kid with a shotgun. But there was one person who has served as an inspiration for me, and that's Thurgood Marshall. Long before I had an opportunity to clerk for him, before I even dreamed about clerking for him, he was someone who inspired great awe in me as someone who, along with his other colleagues in the NAACP, really led an incredible, long, painful, and sometimes dangerous sort of effort to desegregate the nation's schools. And as someone who then served as his law clerk, I don't think I ever really got over the fact that as I sat across the table from him day to day, gosh, that's the guy who won Brown versus Board of Education. You know, what a daily inspiration that was. But the story I wanted to share very quickly was the story of what happened the first day I was ever in his private office, my first day or two, as one of his law clerks. And I was walked in his back office, and I saw all these sort of animal skins and spears and figurines and masks. And I asked him what all of that was for. And I learned about a part of his life that I didn't know about before. And that is the time of his life after Brown versus Board of Education, after Little Rock in the late 50s, and before he became the first African-American Supreme Court justice in the 60s. And I learned that he had been involved in writing the constitutions for the countries in Africa that were about to gain their independence from European colonial rule. And he was very involved in the Kenyan constitution writing process, and he told me that one of the most interesting and difficult issues that he faced as a constitution drafter was what to do to protect the rights of the white citizens of Kenya who truly were about to become minority citizens. And I thought that that was a pretty interesting sort of issue for a man like Justice Marshall to face, given his background and experience. And I asked him what they did, and he said, well, I just closed my eyes, and I decided that I'd give the same rights to a white in Kenya that I'd give to a Negro in Mississippi. And that has stuck with me to this day. That kind of just blew me away. And that's just sort of a small example of the kind of courage and fairness and commitment to equal justice that he demonstrated. As Al mentioned, after I clerked for him, I went to the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York, which is the nation's oldest and, I'd argue, perhaps the greatest federal prosecutor's office in the country. And the one lesson that I learned there, which is an interesting lesson to think about today, is something I learned at the outset and proved to be true, is that prosecutors in this country, who obviously wield quite a bit of power, really should measure their success not based on their one-loss record, but whether they did justice. And that's somewhat, I guess, a cliche in the prosecutorial ranks, but something taken very seriously by me and my colleagues in the Southern District of New York. And there's one person who I want to finish up with by mentioning, who's someone who I think personally lives up to that each and every day, and that's the Attorney General, Janet Reno, who's also served along with Justice Marshall as sort of the two big inspirations in my life. Professional life. Putting aside whatever you might read and despite what you might see in the Wall Street Journal or even the New York Times, what you might hear in some quarters in Congress, she is a woman who every day in the 3.5 years that I worked in Washington, I never saw get swayed by any undue partisan influence, despite the attacks on her that are just more relentless than I think on any cabinet official in a very long time. She really is quite a person and has really been an inspiration for me. Working for her over the last 3 years or so, I've had a chance to sort of have a seat at the table for some fascinating issues involving independent counsel STAR, medical marijuana, physician-assisted suicide, death penalty, Nazi gold, issues that I think are really at the intersection of law and politics and policy. And I think, as I said in the beginning, are the kind of issues that you can work on as a young or reasonably young lawyer who isn't seeking public office, but who really wants to play a role in our public life. I have a sense there's a few people out here in the undergraduate ranks who are thinking about law school, maybe just one or two. And I just want people to know there's some alternatives out there to the corporate track, and I hope to talk about those.
Very good.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you very much. William O. Taylor, Bill Taylor, former chairman of the board and chief executive officer for the Globe newspaper company from 1956 to 1978, the Boston Globe. A director of the New York Times Company, president of the Board of Trustees of the Boston Public Library, and a deep believer in the free and responsible press. He has immersed himself in this city, and he has a powerful allegiance to his beloved Boston, and we all see the daily evidence of that. Bill Taylor.
Thank you, Alan. I know I speak to a group that reads the Globe and the Times every day, so I feel warm and friendly towards all of you. But seriously, newspapers, I think, are one of the great things that this country brings to the table. Like Skip, I grew up, breakfast, lunch, and dinner discussion was the Globe. It was a family business in those days, so at an early age, I was immersed in the trade, so to speak. You may be interested to know that the Globe, way back in the 50s when I came to work, was the third paper in Boston. And we were known as sort of a nice family, sort of low-key, but not very interesting newspaper. And there was a custom that we had on the editorial page. The editorials used to be signed Uncle Dudley. And Uncle Dudley was a character in American history that referred to something up in the state of Maine. I can't give you the particulars of it, but And the editorials were very clear about what the weather pattern was, Greek mythology, a building needed to be saved, but they weren't really dealing with the issues that were, of the moment. So I first became involved, along with Tom Winship, one of the great heroes of the Globe, and my dad, in 1967. And those of you who have studied Boston's history may remember the mayoralty race that was then being held at that time. The two candidates were Louise Day Hicks, whose slogan was, "You know where I stand." And then there was a gentleman by the name of Kevin White, who was her opponent. And the Globe from 1896 to 1967 had not endorsed a political candidate. And the reason was that the fellow who founded the Globe, Charles Taylor, thought that the Democratic ticket went kind of off the deep end in 1896. That was William Jennings Bryan and the Cross of Gold. So from then on, the party line was that we don't endorse candidates, we treat them all alike. Well, it was felt in 1967, and I was in on the conversations, that it was time to change the music. Boston then was it was a nice city, but it's not like it is today. We didn't have the restaurants, we didn't have the fun things that I think that we all enjoy today. And there was another issue that was very important that was really dividing the city, and that had to do, frankly, with race. The schools were in terrible condition, particularly for the children of color. Money was not going into any degree in the way it should have been. There were issues of redevelopment and bringing the city alive, bringing new business into the city. There were issues of transportation and so forth. So we were asked, Tom Winship, myself, and some of the young people, which way we thought the paper ought to go. And we said, we think, looking at my father, who was then publisher, that you should endorse Kevin White, which we did. And it made the difference, and he was elected, and Louise Day Hicks, I guess, still continued in the city council. And the issue of race still continued to divide the city. And as you know, if you forward in your history to the 1970s, the whole busing thing became a very emotional issue, particularly in this community. And we were directly involved with that. I remember coming in one night when some of the folks from one of the Boston neighborhoods decided that it was time that the Globe was taught a lesson. And it was pouring rain. I came in through the back gate, and they didn't know who I was, and they were doing a little chant about the liberal Globe, and I waved at them, and I said hi, and cut through and got into the building. The police commissioner was there, Kevin White was on the phone, and some of these people had actually lain down in the driveway to prevent the trucks from going out. So this went on from about 7:30 till 10:30, and luckily the superintendent of police and the mayor were able to persuade the people that this was not the way to behave, and they removed themselves, and we got the Sunday paper out. But I guess the message I would give you is that I think newspapers and politics belong with one another. I don't think politics works very well if you don't have good newspapers to report about them. And I think one of the issues you have today is, not to knock the electronic media, but very often it's very limited, it's very kind of headline-driven, and we fall into that pattern a little bit too. So I think the more thoughtful we can be, the more accurate we can be, that the better this country is going to be. And I would encourage you to read newspapers. If you come to work, you won't make as much money as you'll make in the investment world and some other places. But I think you'll find it's a lot of fun, and you'll meet some wonderful people like Alan Simpson and some of the other folks up here. And thank you, and it's a privilege to be here.
And now, Marth York. This is the first woman Democratic candidate for governor of Rhode Island. She was the first person to defeat an incumbent governor in a primary election in the state's history, and I don't think many states have a history of that. And that takes courage and persistence. She was elected to the state senate 1991 to 94 and was the chair of the Senate Health, Education, and Welfare Committee, a remarkable citizen legislator, a living adage of the old saying that democracy is not a spectator sport. She is a doer, and doers are interesting people. If you're damned if you do and damned if you don't, then do. Marth?
I don't think there's anything left for me to say. I also want to express my appreciation for the opportunity to be here. It is quite a gift and very much appreciated by all of us. The two key factors in my political career have really been timing and anger, coupled with the first rule of politics, which is that you never say never. And let me explain a little bit. I've always been interested in politics. As a child, I worked on campaigns, stuffed envelopes, and all of that. But I always saw myself as in the background. Even in high school plays, I would work props or do costumes or something. I never wanted to be on stage. I never wanted to take the lead. I wanted to work in the background, even though I loved politics. And then in 1985, we had a constitutional convention in Rhode Island, which was based pretty much like our representative races are. And I was a member of the Women's Political Caucus at the time, and it was supposed to be a nonpartisan convention. The only way it would be nonpartisan would be if citizens who weren't already part of the political establishment ran. So a friend and I went to a meeting, and we listened to everything, and we kind of said to each other, well, I'll do it if you do it. And so we both decided to run, and then didn't see each other for a few months. And I lost. I ran a good race, but I lost by about 50 votes, which was close enough to know that to get the validation that I'd run a good race, but not so close that I lay in bed at night like David Beasley's opponent, counting the people that I should have gotten through the polls. And in part I was inspired to run by Geraldine Ferraro on the example of humor and grace and commitment that she had set as the vice presidential candidate. And the day after that experience, I said to myself, well, I'm glad I did that. It was really an incredible experience, but I'll never do that again. So that is the first lesson in politics, because in 1990, the state senator for my district decided not to run for re-election and suggested that he would support me if I would run for his seat. And so I did. The timing was right. It felt like it was an opportunity that I couldn't pass up, and at a time when I could make a difference. I ran and I won, and we were in Rhode Island in 1991 in the beginnings and then the continuation of the worst banking crisis, the worst economic crisis probably in that state's history. And not only was it an economic crisis, but it was a crisis of corruption and confidence and belief in politics in Rhode Island. We opened up Pandora's box of every possible imaginable story of graft and corruption and self-interest and self-dealing in the political establishment. And we were constantly struggling with choices. And then about 1993, when the governor said that he was going to run again, even though he had promised not to, I looked at him as a member of my own party and the possible Republican opponents, and also had realized as a legislator that whoever defines the problem, whoever says this is what the problem is, defines the parameters of any possible solution. That we were constantly being told, well, we can either cut human services or we can cut education. Which one do you want to cut? But the governor was defining the problem and giving us those minimal choices. And so I got angry. And for me, anger was enough of a motivation to make me think about doing something that I never otherwise would have thought about doing. So I ran for governor. And again, in Rhode Island, our districts are very small. Even as a state senator, the district is 20,000 people. So I knew starting out that nobody knew who I was, and that most of the campaign was spent trying to get people to know who I am and what I'm about and what the issues are. And it was a good campaign in the sense that it really did stay focused on issues and debates of opportunities and choices and solutions. And for all of the negativity in campaigns, and for some of the kind of tagging of labels on people that happens even in good campaigns, it is possible to run a campaign and to be a candidate and not have to engage in mudslinging and labeling all the time, and to really talk about the issues. But I lost that, and I won in the primary and lost the general election to someone who had run a couple of times before for statewide office, had been the U.S. attorney for 20-odd years, and had never really done anything, but hadn't done anything wrong. So he had a good, honest, decent reputation. And I think of it as though that people at the end of the day, we all talk about wanting change, but we want somebody else to change. We don't want to change. And he was a safe, honest, comfortable to choose, so that enough people went to the polls, and he won. And I ran again in '98. And it is a challenge, and it is difficult to take on an incumbent, especially in good economic times when there is no major scandal or divisiveness occurring among the electorate. The discussion in Rhode Island in 1998 was a discussion about how we can do so much better, how we can make the kinds of investments, the kinds of choices that would better prepare us for the next century. That's a difficult discussion to have when people are feeling good. And so I was not successful directly. But I guess one of the points I would make is that we don't always see our success as a direct result. But the issues that we raised, the solutions that we offered, are being incorporated into the agenda for Rhode Island for the next century. For that, I'm very grateful. And I'm also grateful to have been involved in politics, to really understand not just the intersections, but the dependencies between community activists, between individual citizens fighting for change, fighting for an issue that they care about, and the political system as a whole. And I would echo what everybody says about the fact you don't have to run for office, but you need to be a part of this process, one way or the other. And again, I want to thank everybody. This is just a wonderful opportunity. Timing really is everything.
Well, there you see a very remarkable group of people, and I think that they're a great resource for you. And we have a couple of minutes. Byron usually gives me my instructions. Byron, are you there? Yes, you're there. Byron McCann, a wonderful young man who does such a superb job there. He won't take any credit, but I'll give it to him. But he's wonderful. I'm not going to dump this back on him. He's in shock. All right, Byron, you're through. Get back. But we usually don't take any questions. What do we have, about 5 minutes or so, something like that? If there was a pungent question you had searing your bosom.
Al, that phone rang. We had Senator Johnson on the phone.
I could ask Dave Pryor a question. I'd say, Dave, what do you think that our old Senate pals would think that you and I are here at Harvard?
They'd be envious, I'll tell you that. Real envious.
After they got through the original incredulous.
Yeah, after what they've been through, they will really be envious.
I think they would really be.
I think they deserved a vacation this week. I really do. They've worked hard.
Well, it is a good group, as you see, and I hope that you'll look at the study groups. You did. You've seen these people. You've heard them this evening. I could sit here for the last few minutes like William Buckley. You know how that goes. I believe that your question has not been properly. Bill does that, and he's very good at it. You should have seen the night that he was here with John Kenneth Galbraith, and the two of them put on the show in Ken Galbraith's 90th birthday, and Bill Buckley. They're old friends, dear friends. That's what politics is about. William Buckley and Ken Galbraith are salt and tomatoes and meat and potatoes. They enjoy each other immensely. And that's what it's about. It is the sad part, and David was there, when Newt Gingrich came to power, they hadn't been in power for 40 years, and they had revenge in mind. Revenge. They had been mistreated, they felt. And when you feel that in the minority, it doesn't matter whether it's political or racial or whatever minority, you respond. No, you don't. You react. There's a tremendous difference between responding and reacting, and they did. But the most appalling thing was that Newt Gingrich and Dick Gebhardt never talked for 4 months. Neither one of them talked to the other. I don't think the American people had any idea that that's what was going on. There was no sense to it. It was childish. And it was very harmful. That harm will heal. The new speaker is different. He's put up 7 bills. He has a Democrat at least one Democrat on every bill. That's what you do. And you get to know your adversaries. You don't have enemies, you have adversaries. That's another very important point. But anyway, have a wonderful fling with these remarkable people. Come to their courses, come to their study groups, and we'll be doing a lot of things. We have huge numbers of guests and speakers, and former President Ford will be here in mid-March. Joe Lieberman. We'll have an interesting and varied group. Yes. How about Jonathan and Bill taking a shot at that? Do you want to respond to that?
Well, we have spent a tremendous amount of time and money, and continue to do so, using the freedom of information to get access to material. We believe deeply and strongly that it's extremely important. I don't know the particulars of the statute that you're speaking of, but my sense is that it's not a good one, and that it should be, dealt with in a way that restores the intent of the Constitution, which is that the press enjoys the greatest freedom possible, which is based on people's trust and the ability for the press to somewhat self-discipline and self-control their ability to, get into security matters, if it's an international security situation, or perhaps a Pollard case. I don't want to get too particular about it, but there are a whole range of issues we could bring up in this. But I think basically we would be dead against the restriction.
The only thing I would add is with respect to access to court documents. I mean, as a general matter, I think the Department of Justice and Ms. Reno particularly have been very pro-FOIA in terms of making federal court documents and federal agency documents available as a general proposition.
Tell them what FOIA.
Sorry, Freedom of Information Act, passed, late 70s, I think, post-Watergate. The sort of countervailing consideration, though, with respect to what you brought up originally, which is restrictions on defense counsel's ability to speak as opposed to getting access to court documents, is when you're talking about defense counsel or when you're talking about the prosecutor, always the sort of countervailing concern out there in a trial situation, particularly pretrial, is tainting the jury pool. And that's something that can happen on either side. I mean, the government can get up at its press conference announcing its indictment and say wonderful things about its case that may potentially taint a jury pool, and so can a defense counsel who's speaking outside the record. And I think there's a legitimate sort of concern out there with respect to cases that are about to go to trial and juries are about to be picked. It's a hard sort of balance to find. But again, I can't speak to that particular law because I'm not familiar with it.
Dave and I were just thinking why that law would have come up. My hunch is it came up because too many lawyers now will leave after the day and go out in front of the bank of television cameras, try their whole case. The next day they're starting up again, and they come out after that and they put it on again. And so there is a balance somewhere in there. the main people I worked with and Dave worked with in Congress, pretty savvy bunch, Democrat and Republican alike. In fact, that's about the classiest list of people who served in the U.S. Senate from Maine in my time, our time. So they must have had a reason for that. It'd be interesting to probe that with more complete information. I'd be interested in that myself. Well, with that, Terry Donovan, I want to thank Terry for her work with the Fellows, who certainly directs the Fellows program here, and Kathy McLaughlin, who is my deputy director, and I couldn't do these things without her, and Sue Wood, who is my executive assistant. And Byron, thank you for your good work, and to all on the Student Advisory Committee. You really generated a lot of interest, and thanks to the chairs of the Student Advisory Committee and all of you who made this a very fine evening. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Alan.